Tighten up, leaders. Welcome to the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership, the show that drills into the foundations of what leadership is all about. I'm your producer and co-host, Haley Gibson.
And I'm your host, Billy Duran.
Join us as we sit down with leaders from across the country to mine for nuggets of wisdom.
All right, everyone, welcome to the meeting room, where today we're going to be talking about leadership, because this is the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast. I'm the host, Billy Duran, and I'm in the meeting room today with Haley Gibson. She's our producer and co-host. Haley, welcome back to the meeting room.
Great to be here.
Today, we got a really special guest. Nicole Thomas is with us. Nicole is a senior level executive at Coca-Cola Bottler Sales and Services. Nicole's been responsible for leading multi-site operations that support over 4 million annual customer contacts, as well as driving top-line performances for her team to effectively meet the needs of her clients. Her career has included workforce development training, establishing strategy, and a center of excellence model within the customer care center. Nicole, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm very interested in hearing about Coca-Cola Bottler Sales and Services and how it's different from Coca-Cola, because Coca-Cola Company is an American multinational corporation founded in 1892, headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. Have you ever been to the Coca-Cola Museum?
I have not.
When you come out of the museum, every flavor of Coca-Cola, that was the thing I remembered the most, and how important the secret formula was for how the vault, and I don't think but one person didn't hold the whole formula. It was really a cool presentation, and I guess because Coca-Cola's meant so much to me, because my dad worked for Coca-Cola for over 25 years. 1985, fun facts, Haley, about Coca-Cola. 1985, Coca-Cola became the first soft drink in space. The contour bottle for Coca-Cola is over 100 years old. And did you know that in 1950, Coca-Cola in a contour bottle was the first commercial product to appear on the cover of Time magazine, invented by pharmacist John Pemberton? So, Nicole, I mentioned that my dad worked for Coca-Cola a long time ago, and I can remember as a kid. Actually, I think I learned how to drive a forklift at my dad. Don't tell anybody that, but I was a kid learning how to drive a forklift at my dad's warehouse. How has Coca-Cola evolved over the years into this worldwide phenomenon, and really how your company and who you work for is separate now, and how does that work? What does Coca-Cola look like today?
Sure. So there's the Coca-Cola Company. So think of them as who you see on TV. So all the marketing, advertising for all of our Coca-Cola brands. And then there's the North American Operating Unit, which is really focused on like national chain customers. So like a McDonald's, a Walmart, something like that. And then there's the bottling franchise system. So there's over 65 bottlers in North America. Your dad, I'm assuming, probably worked for a bottler back then, because those bottling operations and franchise systems go back for, many, many years. And a lot of them are family owned. And then the company that I work for, Coca-Cola Bottler Sales and Services, think of us as a shared services for the North American bottling system, and we're owned by the bottling system. So we provide services in the areas of procurement, customer care, which is the group that I lead, financial services, HR services. So we're really that shared service arm to really help drive value across the Coca-Cola North American system.
I love that phrase, Haley, driving value. That's one of our things. We talk about value and the value proposition often on the podcast. And Nicole, this is the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast, and we like to talk about leadership and what it looks like, not conceptual, but what it really looks like. And in part of the bio, we read that your involvement with workforce development for Coca-Cola, for Coca-Cola bottlers. What does that mean? What does workforce development look like at your organization?
Sure. So when I started with the company 19 years ago, my title was an organizational development manager. And what that included at the time was training and development, workforce planning, and quality. So I was responsible for making sure that, hey, we had the right training and development tools and resources for our frontline associates, making sure that we, from a workforce planning standpoint, that we had the right people in the right place at the right time, because we had to meet the demand of that workload. So do you have the right number of resources in order to support that workload? And then from a quality perspective, we wanted to make sure that every customer interaction was a high quality interaction, and that they left that interaction feeling like, oh, that was really positive. I made a difference, and I really delivered a quality experience. So back then, that was all startup. I started all of that from scratch. I had a team of maybe 3 people when I first joined, and we were just standing up this whole customer care organization from scratch. And I grew that team into about 65 associates that were supporting all of the frontline associates across the customer care center.
So it's interesting starting from scratch and harken back to things where I get out my pad and pencil. And the first thing that starts from scratch for me is I start with a pad, and this is kind of what I want to do, and then plan step 1, step 2, step 3. I wish I could tell you I was that much of a pragmatist. I'm not. But tell me about how long that took. When you started workforce development and training in this quality program starting from scratch, what is a time frame for something like that?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly isn't fast. I would say it was probably a year to a year and a half for us to get where we were like really solid under our feet and we felt comfortable with what we were delivering. You know, there's a lot of trial and error, test and learn, where you're figuring out what works and what doesn't work, and being willing to adjust when you identify things aren't working as what you maybe originally planned. So it's definitely been a learning process, but it's great to be involved in something like that, because I think at the end of it you feel like, hey, we really accomplished something and really made a positive impact.
Well, you know, we've had Andy Podner, who was on our podcast, and he talked about, you know, the strategic plan, and the very last thing on the strategic plan was to refine and adjust. You know, part of the model is refining and adjusting as we go. And I think oftentimes, and I would say this about our organization, and Hali can attest to this, sometimes we build a plan on something we want to do. It gets so big it can't get off the ground.
Right.
And then we can't find a starting place. So how would you encourage business owners that may be listening here that are thinking about building, whether it's a quality plan or a training plan, and you're talking to one who's really paying attention here on how do you get something like that started?
I would say start small. You know, don't make it overwhelming. Don't make it overly complicated. I think it's really easy to do that. And if you just focus on, for me, I always look at what are the top 3 things that I want to accomplish. If I just focus on those 3 things that are really important and I get those 3 things done, then I can always add more. But if I just focus on those 3, and also that helps from a leadership perspective to keep your team focused, exactly what's the most important, and making sure that you don't get everybody doesn't get overwhelmed. Like, okay, what do I do first?
So as this organization, this big organization, Coca-Cola, has evolved, and I know that we talked about how you're a part of that overall scheme for the Coca-Cola and how you support the services that you support for your organization. How have you navigated the changes? So in the time that you've been with them, you've seen a lot of changes, and how have you navigated through these changes? I mean, it's you've seen a lot happen in your time with them. Have you navigated through these changes?
I think, you have to be comfortable with change. I mean, sometimes it can cause anxiety and stress for people. But I think once you get over that change curve and you really focus on, okay, how can I have an impact? How can I add value? How can I make a difference? I think those are things that are more important to focus on. And for me, it's been being flexible. Like, you've got to, change is a constant. It's always going to be there. That's the one thing that you can count on, right? So being flexible and knowing that, hey, I'm going to come through the end of this change and I could be a way better person. I could be a way better leader than where I started, 6-8 months ago. So we've been through tons of changes, to your point, over the years. I've seen a lot, some of them full circle, but it's always been exciting to be involved in that and be part of those changes.
We just came back from a conference back in the spring, and when I came back and reported to our team, so what did you hear at the conference? I said, here's what I heard. The only certainty that I heard was that there is uncertainty in the market. That was the constant throughout. So you're right. Change is inevitable, and finding a way to be, I think one of our leaders, Scott Killen, Scott's going to get a shout out again today, becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable and recognizing that change is inevitable. Haley, what you got?
Well, last season, we talked a little bit about the responsibility of young leaders needing to essentially kind of metaphorically raise their hand and put themselves up for, additional leadership roles. So how can, in such a large organization like Coca-Cola and, with the Coca-Cola bottlers and sales and services company, how can young leaders or just leaders in general protect against getting lost in the shuffle with their advancement?
Yeah, my advice would be seek out opportunities to learn and grow. You might not have all the boxes checked, but that's okay. And a lot of times I think that holds people back because they may think, oh, I'm really interested in that job or in that opportunity, but I don't have this or that might be on the job, on the job posting. But I always encourage my folks, you don't have to have all those boxes checked, especially when you're in a leadership role. There's lots of transferable skills, and you might not have, the background in that particular process or that particular industry, but you can certainly learn those things. So to me, it's always about taking chances, being okay with being uncomfortable, because usually if you're uncomfortable, you're doing the right things. And to me, it's, just seek out those opportunities to learn and grow.
And, for years we've heard this phrase, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And not to overdo that, but it is important, as you say, metaphorically, but literally, put me in, coach, kind of thing. I've heard you say that. And for those emerging leaders that want to take on more, they have to let someone know they're interested in taking on more. Because sometimes when we're, in the organization, we're looking for those people who are saying, give me a stretch goal, give me a stretch opportunity, and let me show you what I can do. So within your organization, the Coca-Cola bottlers, sales and services, Nicole, how is leadership development promoted? So what do you guys do in developing? So someone says, hey, put me in, coach, and you see some potential in this person, then what? Then what happens?
Well, they're going to work very closely with their direct leader. Then we have a wonderful talent and development organization, so we have a lot of great resources that are available to us there. But we do have development programs for people that are aspiring or new leaders. They have a whole robust program that they go through. And then in addition to that, every associate has the opportunity to work with their leader to build a career growth plan. And it's a documented plan on, okay, here's my strengths, here's my opportunities, here's the areas that I'm interested in, and then what are the developmental actions that me as their manager and for the associate, what can I help them do to get that additional development or that additional exposure? So we will build out those growth plans. And then also what we have for our high potential leaders is we have a program called the Paragon Program. And that's really focused on, these high potential leaders. They have opportunities to grow within the organization, take on more responsibility, and they're part of our talent succession plan. So we're really focused on bringing them together, and we'll bring them together usually 2 or 3 times a year. And it'll be for 2 or 3 days, and it's just solely focused on leadership. So like an example would be putting them through like a strategic thinking Dale Carnegie class or something like that. So there's lots of robust tools and resources. Even for our entire company, we've provided everybody LinkedIn Learning licenses. That's been phenomenal for everyone because you can pick and choose. There's just thousands and thousands of courses available, and it could be something that's work related or it could be something that's more personal, like a hobby. And that I have found is a great opportunity for people to stay connected to the organization and still grow and learn.
So it sounds like that there's as much external encouragement as there is internal from their own personal development.
Yes.
I'm curious how, and if you can talk about this, how are high potential leaders identified? So how does... Bob is over here, and we've identified Bob with high potential. Is that through some assessment that Bob has gone through and he's been identified as with this great potential to be a leader? How does that work?
It's usually an assessment by their direct manager. And then at our executive leadership team, we have a talent and succession plan review. And we're bringing to the table, here's our high potential leaders. And then we're having a conversation with the ELT about, here's these individuals that we're saying, hey, we need to invest in, and we'll have a discussion about, hey, pros, cons, all of that. So it's really directed by their leader, and then a conversation across the broader ELT.
So we talked about the leadership development within the organization from the leader that's coming through. So we talked about this before we got started on how we bring this down to the business owner who has, small business, and he's wanting to develop or she's wanting to develop leaders within her or his organization. What would you say to them, the leader that might say, or the business owner said, I just don't have time. I mean, we're in here day in, day out. We're just trying to keep our head above water. How would you encourage that business owner, invest in your team? What would you say to them? Because they're listening. We have business owners listening to our podcast. What would you say to them, especially the ones that say, I just don't have time?
You have to make it a priority because you're never going to have time, right? It'll always be something that slides to the back burner because everybody's busy. There's always a ton of stuff going on. So you have to make it a priority. You have to make the time. What I tell my team and what I do is I just put it on the calendar. So then it's just like a meeting. It's not really negotiable and I'm not moving it around. You have to schedule the time and invest in the time.
So, Hali, I'm already picking up leadership nuggets here. I mean, that's one of those things that, and I mean, you're saying something that we're just reminding ourselves we already know. We all have the same amount of time, and time just doesn't make itself available. You have to, almost like budgeting, you've got to tell your time where it goes before you put it in your pocket or it's just going to disappear. So, Nicole, we talked a little bit about this when we were kind of standing out there in the hall getting ready to do the podcast. I know that because of COVID and some things, you guys have gotten, some remote workers and you're spread out and, throughout an organization like Coca-Cola and your organization, because you're so spread out, how do you effectively communicate to all these people the mission of the organization? How can you keep some continuity with everybody being so spread out?
Yeah, it's been a lot of creative thinking and trial and error, like I mentioned before, and, some test and learn, especially when COVID hit and everybody was deployed to work at home. We had to get really creative on how do we keep our teams engaged and connected to the organization. So we've tried different things, but I would say what is most successful to keeping the mission statement out there and keeping people connected is those town halls, or we call them all hands meetings, where it's a virtual meeting, everybody joins, and we're talking about, how's the business doing, how are the bottlers doing, and our mission is to act as one to win as a Coca-Cola system every day. So it's really tying it back for our associates on what is the impact that they have on that every day and how they can make a difference. So I think the most effective way has been just our town halls, all hands, but we'll take that from the top of the organization and cascade that all the way down. So even though we may have a town hall or all hands meeting at the top, I'm also going to have my own town hall and all hands meetings with my direct function or line of business. So then I can make it even more tailored to that line of business.
So how many people would that be? So that people in your direct line, how many people we were talking about?
About 200.
So what does that look like? I mean, is that a Teams meeting? Is that you just doing a video and sending it out? Or how does that work?
I've done both, but I think what's most effective is a Teams meeting, and I break them up. So I'll do multiple sessions in the same week because I'm in a situation in our line of business where I can't afford to pull everybody off at the same time because we still have customers coming in and the volume coming in. So what we've done is I'll have a week where I'll say, okay, we're doing town halls this week. I'm going to do an hour each, and I'm doing 5 sessions. That means I'm delivering the same thing pretty much 5 times, but it gives me an opportunity to meet with those smaller groups and have an opportunity for Q&A at the end where people can really get questions answered that may be top of mind. And it's not, this big overwhelming thing. And then plus at the same time, it keeps us being able to run our business.
I love the Q&A piece of that. And as a reminder, policy and the things that we do at our organization to help continue to build a great organization is field those questions, because we're hearing one person's asking it, 10 people's thinking it is
Sure.
generally what I tend to think. Hali?
So we have young and emerging leaders that are listening, and they're all curious as to what makes great team players at the Coca-Cola bottlers and sales services.
Yeah, so we have 3 leadership behaviors that we're focused on. One's own your actions. The other one is engage and inspire, and then builds trust. And I would say from a teamwork perspective, it's own your actions. be constructively discontent. Make sure that you're pushing the needle forward, that you're challenging the status quo, but you're working with your team to, work on a common goal. And I think one of the key skills there is collaboration, and working well with others it can make all the difference in the world.
Constructively discontent.
Yep.
When you said that, I had to cast my eyes up into the air going, let me take that in for a minute, because I'm guilty of hearing something like that and then I'm not listening to you for the next few minutes. But tell me a little more about what is constructively discontent. What does that mean to you?
It's been in our organization for quite some time, and it's really about challenging the status quo and not thinking, well, we're going to do that because we've always done it that way and that just works. We've had a major focus on innovation and how do we continue to be relevant, creating that competitive advantage. And I think that's one thing that is important, is to look at how are you doing things. Are there processes that, hey, we maybe always have done it that way, but it doesn't mean that's the best way to do it. Or maybe there's new technology out there that can make that process or that make it more efficient. So I think it's good to be in a situation where you have the safe environment to take those risks and ask those questions and challenge things that have been, working that way for so long. It doesn't mean that, it's not worth looking at and making a change.
And what's incredibly important there is having the courage to say this isn't working.
Right.
If it didn't work, the saying is if it didn't break, don't fix it, or something along those lines. Sometimes we need to break it. We need to take a look. Is this really the best way? But if it's not working, having the courage to stop it. So, Nicole, we're going to take a real quick break, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about your personal journey, maybe someone who's influenced you. You're on the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast, and we are with Nicole Thomas, and we'll be right back.
Threaded Fasteners is a 100% employee-owned company whose mission is to create value in and for the people we serve. So, if you're interested in learning more about how we develop a people-centric culture, or if you're interested in a customized fastener solution, send us an email at culture@threadedfasteners.com. That's culture@threadedfasteners.com.
All right, welcome back to the meeting room, and we're here with Nicole Thomas, and we're talking about leadership. Nicole has dropped. Haley, Nicole's given so much nuggets, my paper is blued out. I've got writing all over my notes. She's been dropping nuggets of wisdom, and I actually lost my place a while ago. So, Nicole, you're doing a fantastic job and keeping me on my toes today. So we ask everyone that comes in, and this kind of turns more personal now, just kind of about your journey. Tell us someone who's influenced you in your journey and why they influenced you.
Sure. Early on in my career, when I was really working in a contact center environment and I was a supervisor, I had a mentor and a leader. Her name's Jill Robbins, and she was my director, and I just learned so much from her about how to be a really good, authentic leader and how to build relationships with your people. She was a great mentor for me, especially since I was early on in my career and in leadership. I hadn't had a lot of that experience in the past. And she just taught me so much on genuine care and concern, leading with empathy, those kinds of things. I just learned a lot from her, and she's one of my best friends today. And, we haven't worked together in a long time. She retired many years ago. And then the other one that I would say has really made a difference here recently is when I was promoted into the Vice President of Customer Care Center role, I was provided an executive coach. I've never worked with a coach before. It was a little nerve-wracking. I'm like, okay, I'm not sure what to expect here. But Audrey Dorsey is my executive coach. We no longer have the coaching relationship, but we did that for about a year, and I gained so much confidence from that whole experience because I was struggling with that a little bit. And now I'm going to be in board meetings and what do I say? What do I do? Am I going to say the right thing? Can cause some stress and anxiety there. And, it was just something that I was kind of battling with. And my coach she was phenomenal. She really helped me navigate through all the things that were new for me that I was getting exposed to. And those are tools and resources that I still lean on today, even after we've, finished that whole coaching engagement.
So that really was kind of where I was headed with the next question, and kind of how have you evolved? Because, as leaders, we do evolve over time. I mean, I would go back and look at, my journey from 20 years ago to, what I am today. And I'm not so sure that, the experiences, if we had all of those experiences, contribute to what we are. So everything that's happened is contributed to who we are today. And it's definitely part of our leadership journey. I love that authentic and empathy. I would tell you that that's come up a lot. And with leaders, especially leaders at executive level like you are, authenticity and empathy has come up. And it is interesting how we are, to be empathetic, to be a leader. We had someone on our podcast talk about the people that they not are in charge of, but the people they have been charged to encourage and to grow and to help along their journey. So when you talk about the executive coach, I heard the word confidence. What has that done to your leadership role now? How has that helped you?
It's made me so much more comfortable in those settings, when I'm having to present to the board and give them updates on our line of business, and I don't go in there, all full of a bundle of nerves and stress. I'm much more comfortable having a seat at the table, and then also bringing up concerns or challenges if those exist. I feel a lot more comfortable with those situations. And then also just having some of those tools and resources, I know what to go do, and I'm not questioning how I'm going about doing it. Now I'm confident in my process as well.
So since, oftentimes leadership is about coaching and mentoring and having that opportunity. So you had someone to coach you, but I'm sure over the years, the number of people that you've coached and encouraged, is there an experience that you might remember, maybe one thing where you were coaching a young leader, something that kind of sticks out, a memorable moment for you?
Sure. I have he's a dear friend, and we still work together. But back before I even joined Coca-Cola, I worked for another company, and he was a frontline associate, and I really encouraged him to move into a supervisor or people leadership role. And he pushed back. He's like, I'm not ready for that. I'm not capable of doing that. I'm like, I'm telling you, you're going to be phenomenal at it. You just have to take a risk and give it a try. And now we've known each other probably 25 years. And now he's a manager in our HR services space. He's a phenomenal leader. He has grown over the years, tremendously. And it's just been great to be part of that journey with him. We're, like I said, we're great friends, but just when I left that company and came to Coca-Cola, I took him with me, because I knew he's a great leader. He embodies those leadership characteristics that you want your team lead, being a part of. So it's been great to see that journey and just be part of it.
So that business owner that's out there listening and they've identified somebody out there on the floor that they can see some potential in someone, how would you encourage them to engage with that potential leader? How would you encourage that?
I would have an open door conversation and really encourage that individual and highlight the things that you recognize in them that you see as potential, because it might be a confidence thing, right? It might be an issue for them where they feel like maybe I can't do this, and they need to hear from their leader that you have confidence in them. And then also the things that you as their leader can help them do to get more comfortable with moving to that next step.
It's interesting. I love that you say that. And I'm going to go all the way back to one of our first podcasts, Mike Rizzo. We were talking about someone that had influenced him. And he actually, his route of influence was, I saw a leader that I didn't want to be, and I was influenced to go in the other direction. And I know this, that I've had some coaching opportunities with young leaders that have been in a situation that they were under some poor leadership before. They had been spoken down to, discouraged, to the point where they had no confidence in themselves. They had no idea that they could be an influence or an impact player at their organization. But once you start watering that flower, once you start sowing into them, the whole dynamic begin to change. So I think that's a great point for our business owners and leaders. So Nicole, we're kind of wrapping this up a little bit. If we were to kind of pull somebody in and say on your leadership, on your team, and say, what kind of leader is Nicole? What would they say?
I think they would use the word genuine. I really care about my team. I show that care and concern for my team. I'm very transparent with them. Of course, there's times where you can't maybe share all the information of what might be going on. But when I'm in that position, I'm very transparent with them about what's going on in the business. And I'm very inclusive. I include them in all stages of what we're working on. So just last week, I had my whole entire team in Tampa. And we've been building our 3-year strategy we've been working on that for like the last year. So everybody presented their plans last week. It was really exciting to see, hey, this culmination of all this work the last year is coming together. This is what we're going to be focused on between 24 and 27. I want all of our team to know that we have a plan, that we have a path forward, that we're not just flying by the seat of our pants. So I think they would say that I'm very genuine, very inclusive, and I have a lot of care and concern for my team.
So genuine is one of those attributes that we, again, it's one of those things that we hear. And I believe that we are effective with our team when we are genuine and transparent and willing to be vulnerable. Sometimes I don't have the answer, but let's find this out together.
Sure.
That's part of it. So tell us what you're reading these days. What is a leadership nugget you've picked up recently? Something that you're reading or something you can point. We love to point out books that people are reading, and because we have a lot of listeners. Matter of fact, I've had a couple of people mention that they've started a book that they heard on the podcast. So what are you reading these days?
It's a little bit of a twist, not exactly focused on leadership. We've been, like I said, focused on innovation and how do we drive innovation into part of our culture. So I've been reading a book called The Power of Little Ideas by David Robertson, and it's really a different way to look at innovation so that it's not so overwhelming. It's, how can you take small ideas that really make a difference? And it doesn't have to be this major disruptor, like so many people talk about when you think of innovation. And the book's been really interesting because it talks about these top name brand companies that were really struggling and how they really turned innovation on its head and made it more about their core product and how did they add core services or complementary services to that core product. And that was their innovation. It wasn't coming out with something totally brand new. So it's been a different way to think about it. And then I think it's been helpful for me as a leader to help drive that with my team because there's no idea that's really too small. And those little ideas can make a big difference.
Love that. Love the power of little ideas. We have oftentimes, again, sometimes the idea gets so big we can't implement.
Right.
It's almost as if what we're learning how to do is to say, start. Let's start small. And actually, you talked about this early on in the podcast. Start small, have a beta test, the power of little ideas to getting this forward. So, Nicole, if we had another emerging leader sitting right here in the meeting room with us today, and they were kind of struggling with the idea, how do I get started on my leadership journey? And they're sitting right there in front of you. They actually are listening because we have emerging leaders listening to this podcast. How would you encourage them, something that they could do today, something they could start them on their leadership journey?
I think it goes back to seek out those opportunities to learn and grow. Don't be afraid to take risks. Nobody's going to come do it for you. Nobody's going to come lay it on a silver platter for you, right? You have to raise your hand. You have to be willing to take action. And those are when the greatest opportunities present themselves and you learn and grow. And even if you're out of your comfort zone, that's okay. That's probably where you're going to learn the most. So I would just say, raise your hand. Don't be afraid to take those risks. And if you feel you're not ready, do it anyways. You're going to learn so much out of that experience.
Get up to the edge of the cliff and jump, right?
Right.
I appreciate you being on our podcast today, Nicole. And listen, I know that Chris Thomas is one of my favorite people in the whole wide world, Senior VP at Threaded Fasteners. So you're married to one of my favorite people in the whole world, and we're going to get Chris on the podcast. I know Chris is going to have a lot to say, but I appreciate you coming down from Tampa and spending time in the meeting room with us. So Nicole, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, and I can't wait to hear Chris on the next podcast.
There you go. Well, this is the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast. Haley and I will be right back with some closing thoughts. Man, I was so excited to have Nicole come in today, and being in the meeting room, it's always special to have our guests come in the meeting room. I know because of time and space, we can Zoom them in, but it's so much fun when we have someone in the studio. And Nicole brings so much executive experience to the podcast. Her experience at Coca-Cola, the Coca-Cola bottlers, sales and services, and how they bring support to her organization. Haley, having someone with that sort of executive experience, bringing them to the podcast, listening to her talk about workforce development, how they are rolling team members in from evaluating them as high performers, high potential. I really loved the way that she explained how they identify leaders in their organization.
Mm-hmm. I liked her point about the right people, right place, right time. And kind of, like you said, determining who those really high potential future employees. So she made a point about mentioning her talent succession plan. And we have talked about how succession planning is success planning. And so being able to very early on determine who a very high performer is potentially. I mean, those high performers now are your future leaders later.
And this is the phrase I'm going to take away: constructively discontent. Being comfortable that change is inevitable, being comfortable with becoming uncomfortable. I think Nicole brings so much expertise into how we communicate. I love the fact that she identified herself as being genuine with her team. It is an incredible attribute, I believe, for leadership to be genuine, to be authentic, to be vulnerable, and Nicole walked us right down that journey today. So great conversation with Nicole Thomas, and I'm already looking forward to the next episode. So until then, Haley, tighten up.
Tighten up. Thank you for joining the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast, brought to you by the employee owners of Threaded Fasteners. If you enjoyed our conversation, please subscribe to, rate, and review the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Do you have a leadership story to tell or a question to ask? Email us at podcast@threadedfasteners.com. That's podcast@threadedfasteners.com. This show is made possible by our family at Threaded Fasteners, Inc. Our mission is to create value in and for the people we serve. Interested in learning more about TFI and how we create value in our team, in our communities, and in our customers? Visit threadedfasteners.com. Thank you again for listening. I'm your co-host and producer, Haley Gibson.
And I'm your host, Billy Duray.
This show is edited and produced by Johnny Glenn and our friends at Deep Fried Studios.